Socialism is the stunningly primitive concept of government officials deciding what gets produced at a certain level of quality and who gets which products. In the past, especially in Europe, but also in ancient Rome and even older empires, aristocrats decided what gets produced and what the people would get in return for their efforts. This was called serfdom. A serf was not exactly a slave, but it was fairly close. Your lord could not sell you off to foreign places, for example. The Romans called these people coloni. Below that were the coloni adscriptici, and below that, full-on slaves. So what happens when you replace the aristocracy with a communist party? In Soviet Russia, you remained a poor farmer. You were told what to do. You could not change the conditions. If you tried, you were severely punished. So that was not really change. The foundational texts from Karl Marx or Lenin didn't actually tell us how this socialist system would work. Almost the entire body of text consists of complaining about Western capitalism and doomsday prophecies of how this capitalism would degenerate into wild imperialism and misery. Obviously, when industrial capitalism became a thing in the 1800s, different countries could not simply stop thinking and acting as if baseline rules of empires and security had vanished. So the libertarian view is also way too simplistic. Just thinking that you would have people work and trade and wouldn't get involved in foreign countries and everything would work out fine. It's not that simple. If entrepreneurs just follow their own commercial interests, this could have massively weakened a country, including all the espionage stuff. So the main challenge in the West was to increase overall wealth without losing control. The socialists simply complained about the unavoidable realities of empires, and they claimed to have found the solution. In capitalism, you had at least private ownership, prices, and contracts, so it's somewhat concrete. The socialists promoted their gimmicky idea of avoiding significant private ownership and the associated rights and freedoms. But when everything is up for discussion in a socialist system, everyone would talk everything to death. Everyone makes demands. Everyone wants the best possible conditions for themselves. If negotiations break down, the only remaining force for order is violence. Marx and Lenin could never explain how prices for goods and work would be determined. They used the most vague language, and they even made up their own definitions of words. So they talked a lot about the benefits for the community, the greater good, fulfillment of principles, or the expression of principles. If a capitalist asks another capitalist, what's the price of a pack of cigarettes and why? And the answer is, well, it's $3 because we make or buy the tobacco at a certain price. We turn it into cigarettes and pay the workers, and there are different levels of quality. So there's also a pack for $5 and one for $1.50. You want to buy one or you don't? If a socialist asks a socialist what's the price for a pack of cigarettes, the answer is a long-winded sermon. So the potential customer is working a specific job, making specific goods. So his efforts have to be translated somehow into an entitlement for other goods that someone else made. But translated how? How does your work hour that you perform stack up against, other people making cigarettes? So how many cigarettes can you actually get for the work that you perform? Nobody knows. Ultimately, the communists figured they just needed a dictatorship, and then the ruling class would decide how much the people needed to work and what goods they would be getting. So it sounds a lot like serfdom, right? You have a special class of people, the communist party members, and a special class of people, they make all the rules and they decide how much people have to work and what they can return. It's just serfdom. A socialist government had to calculate with actual numbers, so no more wishy-washy sermons. How many calories of food get produced, what goods can be exported to foreign countries, what prices are you getting, and so on and so forth. Real-world communism was a baseline Roman-style empire. They controlled the territory, forced people to work, and tried to expand their territory by any means necessary. And a very important breeding ground for socialism was Germany, other parts of Europe. Now, Germany was not a unified empire, but instead a patchwork of different aristocracies. Some allied, some were enemies. So, for example, the Welfs, Wettins, and Regenarids were allied. They did not have large territories, so they focused instead on enlarging their families and intelligence networks. So this is what you do. If you don't have vast lands and vast armies, this is your only option. And they were pretty successful. They took over places like Denmark, and later they took over Britain, but they kept their networks on German soil. The Prussian Hohenzollerns or the Austrian Habsburgs were far less sophisticated and successful. So, what options did these different aristocracies have to move forward? Well, one option is this. You control industrial capitalism through intelligence networks. That was a slick technique, but risky. And the other option is, or was, you maintain some form of serfdom. And that option was also very risky because the aristocracy was still living the high life in palaces while the workers were miserable. And the more money those workers made, the more sophisticated they would get. And, that could have led to them figuring out, the bigger game. So that's risky. Of course, primitive socialist ideas were spreading everywhere. Just take over the palaces, other places of government, redistribute property, and have socialist officials make the decisions. Now, aristocratic intelligence, secret police units infiltrated the left circles, which was fairly easy at the time because there were no modern legal protections. You could find out where the pamphlets were printed, who was working with whom. You could threaten people and their relatives, and you could recruit assets. It has never been properly researched how much of the socialist movement was infiltrated. The Prussians, for example, now this is Eastern Germany, or at the time it was sort of a middle part of Germany. The Prussians had the idea of gradually allowing a controlled socialist movement to improve the conditions of workers enough to keep them from rebelling. The famous Bismarck was he was famous for new legislation for the workers. So the people had the fake political choice of following establishment conservative politics or following the controlled socialism. And if you scale up this controlled brand of socialism enough, you have a modernized form of serfdom, which is not that obvious. The aristocracy could increasingly hide its role, but this is also a dangerous game because it can go off the rails. Socialism would not be where it is today without the aristocrats. One of the early assets was Oskar Motes, son of a judicial director in Saxony. He was a high-ranking Freemason, he was close to the ruling aristocrats, and in 1861 he created the Gewerbliche Bildungsverein in Leipzig. And those members then created the Allgemeine Deutsche Arbeiterverein, a very important workers' organization. Karl Marx married a woman from the Prussian aristocracy and became a member of the British Royal Society of Arts. When Germany became too dangerous for him, he went to Britain. The relatives of his wife ran the Prussian Ministry of the Interior, which was tasked with spying against the left. Ferdinand Lassalle was another asset. At 20 years old, he got to know the 40 years old Sophie Countess von Hatzfeld in Berlin, who was from the very old aristocracy. The oldest son of Bismarck married into the Hatzfeld family. In 1861, Lassalle and the Countess went to Italy and met the revolutionary Giuseppe Garibaldi, who collaborated with Giuseppe Mazzini to take over Italy. The Italian revolutionaries had their own secret society, the Carbonari, and they were sourcing weapons from different countries, and they unified Italy. If you ever get to visit places like San Marino, you can see the statues for Mazzini and Garibaldi and all that stuff. Again, this happened because of aristocratic networks. Now, these Carbonari, they did have some overlap with socialism, socialist ideas, but again, you have this crazy overlap between the aristocracy and socialism. The Countess was active in the left-wing Allgemeine Deutsche Arbeiterverein, became a political party, a precursor to the SPD party, which became then later the main tool of Moscow, Social Democrats, something like the Democrats in the United States. Now, Sophie von Hatzfeld was called the mother of social democracy because her role was that important. So you should not think that socialism just magically appeared and just, became this juggernaut on its own. No, there was quite a bit of influence on that. And the true story has never been fully revealed. So there's still some of the biggest secrets out there. Wilhelm Liebknecht was also another major asset. Now, Americans will not know his name, but that name is quite infamous or famous here in Germany. In terms of, the left wing. His father was a high-ranking official for Hessen. And the grandfather on his mother's side was also important in Hessen. Now, the ruling family of Hessen was very powerful in the British Empire and elsewhere. So, Vladimir Ulyanov, also known as Lenin, spent considerable time in Europe where serious left networks existed. So, this whole revolution in Russia would not have happened without these networks here. Germany, Switzerland, France, so on and so forth. The German government allowed 32 Russian citizens to travel through its territory in a train car, including Lenin and his wife. Suspicions arose at times that Lenin might be an agent of Germany. The new German Empire, formerly under the control of the Prussian Hohenzollerns, financed the Bolsheviks in the hope of bringing calm to the Eastern Front in World War I. When Lenin arrived in Russia, Lenin's revolutionary plans initially failed. He went to Helsinki in Finland and was hiding in several safe houses. He traveled to Russia again for the October Revolution, and there the Bolsheviks had created the Military Revolutionary Committee, a fighting force that established the new socialist government, the Council of People's Commissars, or Sovnarkom. Trotsky had previously been in New York, got his hands on some serious money there. Olof Aschberg, founder and majority owner of the Swedish cooperative bank AB Nya Banken, diligently helped finance the communist revolution. He had excellent relations with the last finance minister of the Russian Empire, Pyotr Bark, who, with the help of Great Britain and other countries, financed Russia's military activities against Germany in the First World War. Mr. Bark fled to London, to a luxurious mansion, changed his first name to Peter, and was promptly hired by Barings Bank on behalf of the British Central Bank. The Baring family originally came from Hanover, that's Germany, and belonged to a privileged middle-class group there that enjoyed the trust of the nobility. So they were recruited by the nobility to perform certain tasks, one generation to the next. The Hanover branch of the Welfs occupied the British throne from 1714 onwards. Of course, they did not want to be in the limelight that much. They wanted to rule from the shadows. Okay, so it was not just the king and his immediate family, like 5 people or 10 people or whatever. No, the Welfs, they go back to roughly the year 800, possibly even further back. And they were growing exponentially since the year about 800. So it's a cluster of families, and it's extremely large. And they were allied with the other clusters called the Regenarids and the Wettins. Peter Bark became an advisor to the Bank of England, that's the central bank, and earned the Royal Victorian Order and the title of baronet. Of course, the Tsars were very, very much related to the British throne and Denmark. Before he fled to London, he was in Paris and was under surveillance by the French Secret Service. In a dossier from 1919, it was stated that Bark was a Bolshevik agent who had been in contact with Leon Trotsky since 1917, was said to have continued his contacts after the establishment of the Soviet regime. Interesting. So, people from Tsarist times with connections to the British throne, they were helping communists, and they were then continuing to help communists. Very interesting. So at the same time, Bark was a loyal supporter of the Romanov refugees in England, Denmark, and elsewhere. So he was helping both the communists and the Romanovs. He was a very busy man. The Romanovs were basically one in the same family as the British throne and the throne of Denmark. For example, through King George V, with whom he was already in close contact during the war, Bark provided the Tsar's sister, Grand Duchess Xenia, with Frogmore Cottage as their new home. After the death of Maria Fyodorovna, Bark brought jewels worth hundreds of thousands of pounds from Copenhagen to London on behalf of Xenia and her sister Olga. So, agents of European aristocracies helped to quickly rebuild the economy of Soviet Russia. Isn't that interesting? In 1917 and 1918, the American prosecutor and later judge Thomas D. Thatcher was in charge of the Russian mission of the American Red Cross, whose chairman was William Howard Taft, who had previously served as U.S. president. The Red Cross was officially a charity, but at the same time a vehicle for secret foreign policy. The Red Cross mission included Frederick Kors from the branch of the National City Bank in Petrograd. Both Thatcher and Taft were members of the secret organization Skull and Bones, which dates back to the British colonial empire and the nobility. So it's these old British networks in America, like Skull and Bones, and they have people everywhere. And so when these aristocrats, when they still control these networks in the United States, when these aristocrats then have some sort of, they're somehow deeply involved in this communism game, well, that's, of course, a very dangerous thing. So, so a number of American companies came to the rescue of the new Soviet government. Companies based in the Equitable Building at 120 Broadway in New York's financial district. So this was the place where companies were represented, such as General Electric, DuPont, Aluminum Company of New York, certain railway companies, banks such as Barclays, and the New York Federal Reserve. So this was all key to Soviet reconstruction. The key to Russian reconstruction was the Caucasus oil fields in Baku. American companies like the International Bar and Steel Corporation sold the necessary equipment and even bought oil from the Soviets. And between 1898 and 1901, Baku produced more oil than the United States. And so on and so forth. And of course, even before communism, Western companies were involved in Baku, such as Royal Dutch Shell. Well, note the name Royal Dutch Shell, and the partnership of the Nobel brothers. And the Soviets also acquired modern mining and transportation facilities for their manganese deposits, acquired foreign currency, and circumvented official American foreign policy regarding loans to the USSR in a series of business arrangements with the W.A. Harriman Company and the Guarantee Trust. Now, this is basically Skull and Bones connected. The Anglo-Soviet Trade Agreement was an agreement signed in 1921 to facilitate trade between the United Kingdom and the Russian Soviet Republic. It was signed by Robert Horne, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Leonid Krasin, the Russian Commissioner for Foreign Trade. Robert Stevenson Horne, the first Viscount Horne of Slaminen, sat on the Privy Council and was also King's Counsel. So exactly what happened here? Did a plan go off the rails? Did these aristocratic networks and their intelligence services, did these aristocrats mess up? Maybe they wanted to restructure Russia and transform it because the old system with the Romanovs, it wasn't going to work any longer. It was always the threat of Russia falling apart. And with unforeseeable consequences. So wouldn't it have been smarter and more attractive to these certain aristocratic families to restructure Russia? It's perfectly clear these aristocracies really got into the socialism game, because there was always the option of having controlled socialism as a new form of serfdom, and make it seem like the aristocrats are not running things anymore the way they used to, right? So you just create a new serfdom, but it looks like it's, by the people, for the people, sort of that kind of stuff. So maybe that was the idea. Now, how close is this cooperation to this very day between aristocratic networks and the Russians and the Chinese? That's a very interesting question. Because it's one of many possibilities that this whole plan just went off the rails. Okay, you have controlled socialism, you restructure Russia, have a new system in Russia, and then maybe this plan fell apart. And the assets then did their own thing and just ran a very traditional empire. But in that case, if we imagine that scenario, wouldn't there be attempts to still cooperate, between these the communists that we saw in public and some Western very powerful networks? Because ultimately, these two strains are very similar. A new serfdom, or a continuation of old serfdom, and communism. Because for the average person, it feels like the same. You have to work day in, day out, and you have to accept what you can get, and you have no way of really changing things. So this is a very dangerous situation when you have this East-West cooperation, to have these two strains, to develop these two strains. And you see that in modern politics, I think quite a lot, that you're supposed to choose between a very, very right-wing backwards concept, or you're supposed to opt for crazy socialism, right? I mean, in America, some of the Republicans and many Democrats, they stand for these two strains of thinking. Now, of course, when the Democrats have a standard socialist agenda, I mean, we know what it is. But with some of the Republicans, it seems like they push a line that is very medieval, something that Americans are not really familiar with. So when people start claiming on social media more and more that the Earth is flat, and the modern view on the universe is a left-wing conspiracy or whatever, if people are calling more and more for arranged marriages, so that's so some idiot will get get a girl because his father buys him a wife, a young bride. More and more people are calling for that. That's very medieval, and so you see this concept being pushed, and some of these American companies, tied to especially Skull and Bones, which is a British intelligence network. You have to remember that. It's not really American. It's British. So you have some of these companies, they have an idea of capitalism that is not really capitalism. It's more like aristocracy and serfdom. Okay, so this is kind of the dangerous strain that you can see in America. And you can feel that. You can feel that strain. You can feel it when you go to work and you don't make any significant money, and you have to pay all these taxes and whatnot, and you get treated badly at your job. This is what serfdom feels like, and you cannot change the situation. And so this is what you have to be aware of, that that there are these old networks and they still exist and their role has never been properly looked at. Now, I've been specializing in this topic, besides quite a few other topics. And you can find a lot more about this on my channel and in my ebook, Old Intelligence Networks in Enlightenment and Communism. The book is called The Royal Cryptocracy. You can find the link in the description below. So the baseline concept is very simple, right? Large empires need large intelligence networks to function. Simple, right? And this is not just the case for modern empires, of the 20th century and now the 21st century, but this was also true for past centuries and even past millennia. Now, research was difficult into old intelligence networks because we don't have the perfect files. We don't have, just these boxes of documents we can go through. But so you have to be very, very forensic, and you have to apply modern style intelligence techniques. You have to apply that to history and look for networks and look for operations. Now, this is what I call a reconstruction method. It's not perfect, but it's the best you can do. Because if you miss these older networks, you're missing a key player in history that still exists to this very day. And so the real history of communism has not been, or the full real history of communism has not been truly revealed. So I hope I gave you a suitable introduction into this topic. And if you check out my ebook, you can find a lot more about this.